Hi everyone, so we are now in week 2 of our lecture. Today we will discuss law on partnership, part 2, particularly the contract of partnership. Okay, so let's begin. Wait a minute, it seems like my PowerPoint isn't working. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry for this. I have to. Here we go. All right. So since we are going to discuss today about the contract of partnership, let me emphasize that the flow of the discussion will be based on the essential elements of the contract of partnership. So we have here three essential elements: consent, subject matter, and the consideration. We will discuss this one by one. So when we speak of consent, it refers to the meeting of the minds of two or more persons who would want to contribute money, industry, or property in order to make a common fund, and of course, with the intention to divide the profit within or among themselves. Now, just have to remember that when we speak of consent, it refers to the meeting of the minds or the agreement whereby two or more persons decided to bind themselves to enter into a contract of partnership. Next is the subject matter. So, if we can remember Article 1767, we've been repeating that particular provision of law. It also pertains, aside from the consent, it also pertains to the subject matter of the contract of partnership. So, the contract of partnership, its subject matter is the creation of common fund. Okay? It's the creation of common fund. So you have to remember that the purpose why partners are contributing money, property, or industry is in order to establish a common fund. And why common fund is important to be established in a contract of partnership, simply because the common fund will be utilized, will be used up in order to establish a business enterprise, or as they would call it, as they call it, going concern, business going concern. So you have to remember that if you do not have the common fund, then you cannot proceed to the operations or the discharge of the functions of business aspect of partnership in itself. That is why the subject matter there, or the center of this contract, is the creation of common fund. The last element is the consideration. Okay, so when we speak of consideration, it is more like something that will be considered by the partners in entering a contract of partnership. So you enter a contract of partnership considering that you have to give a particular sum of money, or that you have to contribute a property or an industry, for example. So the contribution, or the act of contributing in itself, you have to remember that earlier we discussed about the creation of the common fund. Okay? So creation of common fund is the subject matter. However, the act of contributing, okay, so for example, you have to take into consideration how much you contribute, how much what is the extent of contribution that will be required for you. Uh, if it is money, how much? If it is industry, what kind of industry? Is it service, or whatsoever. If it is property, what form of property will be contributed? So those things are actually an example of your consideration. So it is more like the the thing that you will give, you will surrender to the domain of the partnership. That will be the consideration of the contract of partnership. Now, let us discuss the element of consent. Okay, so there are rules in the element of consent because you have to remember that when two or more persons bind themselves to contribute money, property, or industry in order to in order to create a common fund and divide the profit within themselves later on, so there is a partnership there. However, there are instances wherein people tend to act as partners, tend to make the public believe that there is a contract of partnership between or among themselves. But clearly, the purpose of their scheme is to deceive the public. So in that particular scenario, we have a rule contemplated by law that the persons who are not partners within themselves are also not considered as partners as to third persons. So example niyan is for halimbawa si A, B, C ay nagbebenta sila ng mga gulay. Tapos yung mga gulay pala na binebenta nila is mga ah, sabihin nating nakaw na gulay yon. So, ngayon, ang nangyari doon sa mga benta na nakaw na gulay, nung, nung kinasuhan na sila, sabi na ngayon ni A na, hindi ako dapat masali sa kaso kasi we're not partners. Oh, we're not partners. Or sabihin naman ni B na, na ako din, hindi din dapat ako damay dyan because we're not partners. While it is true no na hindi sila damay-damay kasi nga they are not partners as to third persons. However, liable pa din sila doon sa kanilang scheme na in-establish. Okay? Next. So, sharing the income does not of itself establish a partnership. Hindi ibig sabihin nun na, say for example, sa isang condominium building, nag-share yung may-ari nun ng lahat ng mga proceeds doon sa kanilang family, meron na kaagad contract of partnership. No, it's not like that. Why? Because the sharing of the income may also indicate co-ownership and not partnership. So, in order to play it safe to determine fairly whether or not there is a contract of partnership, the contract of partnership exists in the parties, is to determine it through the elements or through the requisites, no? Kasi kung hindi nila masatisfy yung requisites is hindi talaga siya or wala talagang contract of partnership. However, ito naman, ang isang rule din dito, the receipt, no, nakakuha siya ng resibo doon sa income ng business. Actually, it's a prima facie evidence. What does it mean when we say prima facie? Actually, it is more like the face of the document in itself. Ibig sabihin noon na uh, para na siyang, kumbaga, pwede siyang evidentiary, more like kapag meron kang resibo, pwede mong gamiting evidence yan to prove na meron talagang existence of partnership between sa'yo at saka doon sa other parties. Okay? So, yung kapag nakakuha ka ng resibo doon sa business income, so pwede mong gamiting patunay yon para mag-establish ng partnership. Pero of course, merong mga exemptions yan kasi kung yung resibo na natanggap mo is for the payment of debt, ibig sabihin nun binayaran yung utang, walang partnership kasi nga bayad utang lang ang function noon. So you have to remember that ang resibo, although it can be used as an evidence to establish contract of partnership, however, it's not in all cases na ganyan po. Now let us talk about legal capacity to contract a partnership. Okay. So, what does it mean by legal capacity? When we speak of legal capacity, um, the law contemplates this concept na ang isang tao ay hindi siya disqualified to enter into contract of partnership. Ibig sabihin, mentally equipped siya, alam niya yung mga ginagawa niya, hindi naman siya minor, hindi naman siya fall short of sanity. So, ibig sabihin, pwede siya mag-enter into contract of partnership. However, merong prohibition dito kasi yung mga hindi pwedeng mag-donate, okay? Meron kasing provision sa New Civil Code na pinagbabawal ang donation sa particular relationship. Like say for example, doon sa husband and wife, ang donation na allowed doon is moderate donation lang kasi hindi mo pwedeng i-donate lahat sa husband mo in order to escape liabilities kaya moderation lang. Doon naman sa mga public officers, normally hindi talaga sila pwedeng bigyan ng donation because it's tantamount to violation, no? Bawal mo silang bigyan ng mga ganun-ganun ng mga yung mga politician mag-donate-donate ka. Meron ding mga specific na batas para diyan. Okay? So you have to keep in mind na um, hindi lahat ng relationship may form a contract of partnership. Limited po ito siya, hindi po lahat-lahat. So, halimbawa naman din kung lahat-lahat ng mga okay naman lahat, hindi naman sila prohibited by law to contract into partnership, tapos gusto niyang mag-join, automatic ba makaka-join siya considering na wala siyang legal impediment to bar him or her to join a certain form of partnership? Like say for example, si ABC, partners na silang tatlo. Tapos here comes D, gusto niyang maki-join. Eh ngayon sabi ni D, isali niyo na ako. Hindi naman ako prohibited by law to contract into partnership. Can D automatically join the partnership of ABC? The answer there is no, because you have to remember that the basic or the fundamental unit of contract of partnership is consent. So therefore, there has to be a joint consent coming from A, B, and C to let letter D join the partnership. So if D cannot obtain the consent of A, B, C, of A, B, and C, then D will not be able to join the partnership. For example, si A and B lang ang nagbigay ng consent, ayaw naman ni C, hindi po pwede yon. Hindi po pwede na majority ang rule in obtaining consent. There has to, the rule is all of them must uniformly provide their consent in order to admit one individual in joining their partnership. The rationale of the rule, again, is because partnership is founded on the basis of consent. Iyon po siya. Now, let us proceed to subject matter. Okay. So, ayun, pasensya na, binasa ko pa siya gamit ang screen reader ko kaya medyo natagalan ako magsalita. But anyway, here it is. Yung dito naman sa subject matter, in-explain ng kasong ito, you can read it and explain. It's Moran Jr. versus Court of Appeals. It was explained in this case that in the partnership, the essence there is to share the profits and at the same time to bear the loss equally. So hindi pwede na sa profit equal ang sharing tapos sa loss naman ayaw mong maki-share. No, it's not like that. Because hindi mo pwedeng singilin doon sa partner mo. For example, si sabihin natin si Juan and si Pedro. Juan and Pedro contributed 1,000 pesos each in order to establish a um, laundry business. Tapos ngayon nalugi. Ang kinita lang is 120,000, lugi sila ng 80,000. Ngayon, itong si Pedro, gusto niyang singilin yung kanyang kapital kay Juan. Sabi niya, Juan, ibigay mo sa akin yung 100,000 kasi nag-contribute ako niyan. Sa iyo lang yung natira na 20,000. Is that correct? Of course, it's not. Why? Because As a partner, Pedro and Juan should share not only the profit but also the losses of the business. So since Juan and Pedro's business venture or Juan and Pedro's business enterprise earned 100,000 pesos only and it did not exceed to the common fund, which is 200,000 pesos, then the 100,000 pesos will be divided into two. So 60,000 pesos each po sila. Kasi tandaan natin na ang subject matter ng partnership is yung pag-establish ng business venture. Tapos doon sa business venture na yon, we do not only anong tawag niyan? We do not only share the profit but also the losses. Kasi itong case na ito naging popular siya kasi kung matatandaan niyo yung famous provision natin which is Article 1767, there was no mentioning of sharing the losses. What the law contemplates only or what the law provides only in its black letter is the intention to divide the profits among themselves. So you have to keep in mind that that phrase, the intention to divide the profits among themselves, does not give rise to a scenario that all partnership will have a profit. Meron po talaga mga instances na may mga malulugi because of the mismanagement, because of the environmental contribution and all that. So kapag nalugi po yung partnership, walang profit, then the partners must bear the loss equally. Ayun. So I hope you remember this case ha. Baka lumabas po ito sooner sa maitanong sa inyo sa bang part ng inyong live. Now ito naman, itong case naman, Abilos Jr. versus Commissioner on Internal Revenue. Ang nangyari naman sa kasong ito is magkakapatid sila, apat sila na magkakapatid. Ngayon, na namatay yung parents nila tapos nag-inherit sila ng lupa, nag-inherit rather sila ng lupa. Tapos at first they want to construct a residential house to the land they inherited from their parents. However, later on they found out that it is impossible to construct a residential house there because number one, the it is costly for them to construct a land. So, dahil hindi nila ma-achieve yung kanilang objective, which is to build a house, they sell it. Pareho sila ng mga naisip. They sell the land. Tapos ngayon, nung nabenta na nila yung lupa, is inassess sila ng BIR, ng Commissioner on Internal Revenue, na magbayad ng additional tax because they are partnership daw. Kasi nagbenta sila kumita sila alam niyo naman ang tax. Lahat ng kinikita natin may portion na nakukuha ng tax. So ayun, kumita naman sila. So the BIR wants them to pay an additional tax for that particular business. Sabi nung magkakapatid, bakit naman kami magbabayad? We're not partners. We're just sisters and decided to sell the land we inherited from our parents because we can no longer build a house from there. So we are not partners. We are just co-owners of that particular land. Sabi naman ni BIR, no, you are partners because there is a contribution. Here, what was contributed was property, that land, that parcel of land, and then they were able to bind themselves to make that common fund and then sell it. And the sale was successful. They profited from it and then they divided the proceeds within themselves. So in other words, they completed the essential requisites of a contract of partnership as set forth by Article 1767. Now the question is, paano ba to? How do we intend to resolve this? Is there a contract of partnership or tama ba yung contention ng mga magkakapatid? The Supreme Court held na tama yung magkakapatid, mali si BIR. Why is that? Because you have to remember that Aside from completing or satisfying all the requisites as provided forth under Article 1167, we have to keep in mind the basic essential elements of a contract of partnership, which are consent, subject matter, and consideration. Here, there was no problem as to consent and consideration. Why? Because there was a meeting of the minds among the sisters to sell their inheritance, and they were able to contribute. But what is or the defect here lies with the second element, which is the subject matter. Why so? Because you have to remember that when we contribute a common find, the primary consideration is to establish a business enterprise. Here, there was no establishment of business enterprise because they were only proposing a sale, or they were only um, selling that inheritance because they can no longer achieve their primary intent. And the business is not continuous. Isang beses lang po nangyari yon. You have to remember that when we speak of a business enterprise, dapat merong continuous operation. Dito naman po, wala naman pong continuous operation. It happened only once. So because of that, the Supreme Court upheld the contention of Abilos and um, declared that the sisters should not pay an additional tax. Yun po. Yun po yung pinaka-essential sa kaso na ito. So you have to remember that because it is one of the determination whether or not there is an existing contract of partnership between the parties. Now let us proceed. Ito namang dalawang kaso na ito is merong partnership na nabuo dito. Kasi itong sa case ni Evangelista versus itong case ni Evangelista versus Commissioner on Internal Revenue, sila kasi ng mga magkakapatid is yun talaga yung primary business nila. Bumibili sila ng mga lupa tapos pinaparentahan sa ibang tao. So you have to remember that the business there is continuous and there is a primary intent to pursue a leasing business o yung pagpapaupa ng mga lupa. Dahil dyan, napatunayan talaga na meron talagang contract of partnership. Katulad lang din dito sa case ng Reyes versus Commissioner on Internal Revenue, wherein yung mag-amang Reyes is ganun din, meron din silang intention to propose business or to institute business. Kahit na pina-administrate nila ito or pina-administer rather nila ito, meron pa rin talaga yung intention doon. So, ganun ka-importante po yung intention. Okay. Now, let us talk about cause or consideration. So, sinabi na po natin ito that the cost and consideration of a contract of partnership is the undertaking to contribute money, property, or industry. Okay? So, now let's proceed to other elements. Ito na. This is actually from the, parang kumbaga, American jurisdiction ang nagpo-provide ng additional elements na ito. In the Philippine jurisdiction, tama na po yung dalawa kasi naka-embody na po itong dalawang ito doon sa tatlong naunang element na na-discuss natin. To pursue a particular going concern, we have already discussed this under the second element, which is the subject matter. And also to establish a joint control, this is an elaborated part of, when you establish your business, you will be able to control it based on your own preference. Kaya these elements are not that much emphasized in the Philippine jurisdiction kasi nga incorporated na siya doon sa naunang three essential elements. Okay? So I hope that helps. Maraming salamat sa panonood and see you next time.